Hello, everyone. Good morning. So, welcome to the first GeoTalks Podcast live show and panel discussion. We are really happy to have you all here for this. So, if you're unfamiliar with the podcast, we've been highlighting the work of professionals who use GIS software to solve spatial challenges. And today we're joined by three bathymetry experts and one of our software specialists to learn about the connection between GIS and bathymetry. So let's take a look at the agenda for the show today because we've got a lot on the docket. First up is going to be kicking things off with a global mapper demo is going to be the team at Survey Systems. Then our resident expert, Gus Cook, is going to join us to share his insights on leveraging Global Mapper to improve your bathymetric projects. And then finally, in common GeoTalks fashion, we are going to wrap things up with a panel discussion featuring all of our experts. So while I can't wait to discuss GIS software and bathymetry in depth, let's start with some basics. So bathymetry is a unique field of study because it involves mapping an environment that's very different from the land. With bathymetry, we're studying the depth of the terrain as opposed to its elevation. GIS software enables users to combine data sets, visualize spatial information, and analyze this data to better understand it. Together, they help professionals across industries present their bathymetric data not only with ease, but with accuracy. Let's get into our first demo. I'd like to welcome Matt Nichols and Joe Regard from Survey Systems. Hello. So Survey Systems is a company based in Colorado, and it's known for its accuracy in performing both hydrographic and traditional land surveys. So welcome, both of you. How are you today?
Doing good. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you.
Glad to hear it. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining us today. I'm doing all right myself, and we're looking forward to your session. So thanks for kicking things off for us. And you guys will be sharing your screen, correct?
Yeah.
Awesome. Beautiful. I'll let you guys take it away.
All right. I have a project here that we have done. This is the lower Colorado River. This is a section of Lake Mojave. And we performed this survey 3 years ago now. We were just back down there this year, so that's why it's still fresh in our minds. And I wanted to show some of the ways I've used Global Mapper to help us complete this. The first steps here is I've just got the aerial turned on, and I'm showing a white line and a red line off on the side. This was the limits of a LiDAR survey that we had done, and it was a bathymetric LiDAR, so they did get inside of the water a bit. And I took that and tried to establish a boundary line to where we could get overlap but keep our boats safe. So this is a line that I was able to create, and we were able to share with the crew in the field while they're doing the collection to keep them off of anything that I'm seeing in the shallow areas to keep all the equipment safe. And the next step that I used in Global Mapper to keep was the best bet was the keeping track of our dailies. So every day as we brought data in, I would just bring the data in, kick it out in a format just really quickly to bring into Global Mapper, so I could review what each day was looking like. I could check for any missing lines or any spots that we needed to get a little bit more detail in. You can see I've got some gaps in between the data that we collected on this one. We were trying to collect as much data as we could for the amount of time we had out there. So we were not collecting like 200% coverage like you typically would. We were aiming for as much as possible. But we would do this striping, and then we would identify features and run back along through those features. So when I would take the daily files, and don't mind the colors, it's just what it was exported as. These were doing TIFF files, and one of them is a KML. One of the big benefits of a Global Mapper is just I can drop in anything. It just handles whatever I want. I can just drop it in. As long as I've got my coordinates set for my project, I drop it in and it just pops in. And then I can change formats from there as I need to. But what I would do is I would take this in and I would check over some overlaps, and I would look at, let me turn off the imagery so it doesn't have to load each time. I would take a look at some features and see how things are looking, and then just doing a quick rough pass on the data. I'm not, this data wasn't cleaned. It's hardly been processed. It was just brought in. It's just looking at where we've been and what, if things kind of look out of place. Like I have a line here that looked a little bit rougher than the other lines. So that was a line that I sent back to the crew in the field and said, hey, next time you're driving through here, we can grab that line again because it just doesn't look the same as all the others. And we'd also identify features as in the tops and toes of a channel. We don't want to just leave a gap there. We want to turn the boat and follow that channel down. So we're able to deliver an accurate surface. And I really like this area from where all the underwater rivers running through here. The underwater channels are hitting different floor types and causing all sorts of sand waves and channels and patterns in the bottom. And this is all under Lake Mojave. Some of the other huge benefits on Global Mapper were the ability to take in any sort of data and export it out in one concise format. I'm typically using LESs for point clouds, and this program really handles that data very well. Really handles it very well. I can tell it no matter what I want it out of, it's gonna handle it. I've not seen anything in the say in the exports that hasn't that's not something that I already really want. It's the longest list of export file types that I've ever used. I use it as my Swiss Army knife. It does a little bit of everything. This is the final product. So this product was created using all that raw data. After it's been meticulously cleaned, we want to hand clean each one of those, delete out any bushes, any vegetation, or maybe fish returns that might be down near the bottom, so we can get a nice solid ground surface. And then we combined everything together, and this is these are the TIFFs of the final product and how it looks. Even with when we were striping through, you can still see some lines coming through there. That the data just looks phenomenal. It just looks really good. And yeah, when I'm doing the field tracking, I'm exporting out the TIFFs of each day, and each one of the TIFFs I would export as a GeoTIFF. And that makes it to where it's a much smaller file that I could then email over to the field crew, and the field crew can bring that in as Matt's out there on the boat. He can load that TIFF in and have it in the background and be able to see exactly where he was the day before. He can go back and look at previous days. It doesn't bog everything down if I export the TIFF out at a small enough resolution. It just sits there and lets him know where he's been and where he needs to go next, so he can plan. And that really helped us out. Just the speed of being able to do that, being able to take his data in and save it down and kick it right back out. And that red line helped you out quite a bit, didn't it, Matt?
Yes, yes. So, in hydrographic surveying, you're kind of a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs when you get up into those shallow areas. And so that red and green line, it's white in this instance, is a great benefit to us. When we're using topo bathy LiDAR, it gets some coverage down into that shallow water, like from the shoreline down. And it depends on the clarity of the water, what kind of penetration they get. This Lake Mojave, for instance, they got consistently 20 and sometimes 30-foot returns. But if we can keep the boat in a safe area and collect data up, that allows us to do that. The huge benefit on the data collection side is that area that Joe was showing you is where the ancient bed of the Colorado River where it used to run. It's still running there. And so when we got into that area, we identified it because of the sound velocity change at the sonar sensor. And and above it, so what the water was doing was coming up. So that, we got our hands full on the data collection side, but if we know what our coverage was and we know where we're safe at, and that's where we're able to communicate back and forth from the office to the field to make sure that we're getting adequate coverage. And the huge benefit of using it is you can translate the data and send it back and forth. So our data collection package does not do coordinate transformations. And so those transformations have to be handled outside of our data collection package. So once you set your data collection up, you're stuck with it. You can't drag in anything like you can in Global Mapper and it'll change the coordinates if it's in the header. It doesn't do that. So if we have an aerial that we want to run in the background, because sometimes the aerials are beneficial as well to show us like seamounts and stuff like that, then that's there. And then we can have a layer on top of it of where our coverage was the day before, and then know what our gaps, where some of the data might have gone haywire because of the sound velocity, especially working in lakes and reservoirs. Reservoirs are highly dynamic, very similar to estuary areas where you get a lot of mixing between saltwater, freshwater, or turbidity. You got thermoclines in a reservoir. You got your sound velocity casting all day. And so when some of that data goes haywire, Joe's able to communicate that back to us. Hey, something happened right here, and we saw it there, and we went back and we cleaned that area up to make sure we got it, because you can see that's the floodplain from the Colorado River where it used to go. But right now the water's still coming down through there and shoots to the surface instead of actually following the old river channel. So we had a lot of changes in water temperature in that area, and then that was really messing with our data. So we had to take a lot more casts. But that's, to have that on the boat when you're running is really critical in these types of environments, because you got your hands full on the data collection because it's such a dynamic environment trying to get it collected that you don't want to worry about hitting an underwater seamount, which there were a couple of those that didn't get identified. It was a big project though. It's 342 miles from Hoover Dam all the way to Mexico. So we were out there quite a while.
Yeah,
But
it's a little, it just does everything. A little Swiss Army knife program that I can bring in whatever format I've tried. I don't think I've had a file format that's not brought in, and then I can kick it out in anything I want to do. I can surface it. I can grid everything out. I can LAS out. I can do a lot. I can do an awful lot, and it really helped out here.
and huge data sets, like in Global Mapper, Joe manages the entire data set, but he's able to cut out smaller sections for us, and send those to us, and they just drop right in.
Yeah,
They drop right in so we can see where it is. Because if you drop a huge data set inside of our data collection program, that's not a good idea, right? Because then you're crashing all day long, and you got enough going on. There's the start to finish, right? You got the whole thing up there.
Hoover Dam down to Mexico.
But that's
it. Thank you.
That's our work through.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to get into, we already have a bunch of questions coming in, so we'll get into those during our Q&A portion. But I'm excited to kick off Gus Cook's demo. So, Gus, thank you for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Meg. Excited to be here.
Awesome. I'm glad. Well, we're going to get right into things, but do you want to give a little bit of information about your presentation first?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me provide a little bit of context. So, the little presentation I put together is related to the particular process through which you could take a multi-beam survey and create an elevation grid and then extract specific perpendicular profiles from that source multi-beam survey. And then I quickly touch on additionally the break lines tool as well. So that's just a little bit of context before we jump into things.
Awesome. Thank you, Gus. I'm going to share that video now.
Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. In this particular section, I'm going to be talking about kind of a variety of features and functions within Global Mapper that can be used to analyze as well as visualize bathymetric data. For some geographic context, we are right off of the coast of Saipan, on the western coast within the Saipan harbor. And what I have currently loaded is the results of a multi-beam sonar survey. And we're going to be doing a couple things to kind of extract derivative information from this sonar survey. And the first thing that I've actually done is I loaded in the MB121 files and exported them to a CSV. When we export that CSV, we have the ability to load it in and treat that particular set of points rather than regular vector points. We have the ability to treat those as if they were point cloud data. So within our generic text file importer, I can choose the import type LiDAR point cloud. And what this allows me to do is have a lot faster rendering when working with this particular type of data, as well as having access to all of the point cloud specific tools contained within Global Mapper. So I've actually already imported this, so I'm going to just close this dialog. And that's what we're currently looking at here, is this point cloud layer that I created through combining these 3 separate files containing the results of the multi-beam survey. The first thing I want to do is create an elevation grid from this multi-beam survey. The issue that we're going to encounter here is the interpolation that's going to be applied when we create our grid. What we can do to get around that is creating a bounding box that we can use to define the bounds of our grid so that, for example, this area up here, we don't want to have any interpolation between these two kind of sections of the survey. So what I can do is create my bounding box for this layer. So I'm going to go into that particular layer's options within the control center. I'm going to right click, layer, B-box coverages. And now I'm going to be prompted, do I want to create the rectangular bounding box of this layer, or do I want to create the valid coverage area, the polygonal coverage area? So I'm going to select no to create that polygonal coverage area. And now I have the ability to choose how roughly or smoothly is that bounding box going to align with my data bounds. And I'm going to adjust this smoothing factor so we're really close to the, we're kind of fitting as close as possible to the edge of our valid data area. So I'm going to choose a value of 3 here. And I'm going to generate this new area feature that outlines the boundaries of our valid data. Now, I'm going to go ahead and select that area feature. And with that selected, I'm going to go ahead and generate my elevation grid. I'm going to choose just my sonar layer as my input. I'm going to leave pretty much everything in its default state, except within the grid bounds, I'm going to choose this option to crop to our selected area features. That way, we are not going to have any of those interpolated areas that we don't really want in our output grid. Now that we've created our elevation grid, there's a couple other tools I wanted to talk about. The first of which is our path profile tool. So this is going to give us the ability to take a crosscut of our bathymetric data and extract that into a number of perpendicular profile features. So we're going to have these 3D line features that are going to be generated at a specified spacing along the path of our sonar data here. So there's a couple ways we can initiate the path profile tool. I can manually draw my line, But to save a little time here, I've actually already drawn a line along the area that I want to extract. And we can select that existing line feature. And let me just change my layer order so you can see we've selected that line feature. Now we have the ability to initiate a profile view from that selected line. So I'm going to right click, Analysis Measurement, and then I'm going to choose Path Profile. Alrighty, so here is our profile view of this particular line along our sonar data. And what I want to do is extract crosscuts of the initial line that was drawn. So I'm going to go and select this option to show our perpendicular profiles. And we can see as I toggle along the length of our initially drawn line, you can see all of the different kind of cross profiles that we're looking at. We have the ability to change the interval. So I'm going to open up my path profile settings. I'm going to adjust to a fixed distance interval, and let's set this to 30-meter spacing. Now, when I adjust from one perpendicular view to another, we can see that we're doing it in 30-meter increments. Now, to extract this profile, I'm just going to go to the File drop-down menu within our Path Profile view. I'm going to select this option to save path to a new layer. We could also save it directly to a file, to a DXF or a CSV, for example. And then I'm going to choose all of my cross profiles. Alrighty, let me go ahead and close the Path Profile view and turn off all of my other layers except for my cross profiles that I've created. Let's take a look at those in the 3D viewer here. So now I've created this set of cross profiles following along the length of my existing multi-beam survey. For kind of a second half of this section, I'm going to be talking a little bit about bathymetric LiDAR data. So within the same area in the Saipan Harbor, we also have a bathymetric LiDAR survey. And we are going to use this survey to generate break lines that represent lines of a particular change in slope or curvature. We want to identify those and create vector features representing them. So the first step in that process, just like we did with our sonar, is to create an elevation grid from our LiDAR data. So we have our elevation grid that we've generated. Now we can move on to extracting our break lines. Before I actually jump into doing that, I'm going to go ahead and switch to our slope shader here. Now the slope shader will give me a good method to kind of estimate some of the parameters that I need to use for my break line extraction, roughly looking at kind of the boundary areas that I'm looking to identify. What is the slope in those particular areas? So what I'm going to do is go up here to our Extract Break Lines tool, and this is a Global Mapper Pro feature, it should be noted. And I'm going to use this first method here to identify kind of the slope boundaries on flatter areas. And we are defining what a flat area means to us. So in this example, we are treating anything that is 7.5 degrees or less in slope as a flat area. And we're also defining if there is a particular break in one of those flat slopes, how far are we going to interpolate the line to continue it if there is a break in one of those flat slope areas. The other thing I'm doing is specifying a minimum break line length to get rid of some of those kind of smaller output lines. I'm going to go ahead and create this output, our extracted break lines from our original bathymetric LiDAR survey. And the last thing I'm going to do after we've generated our break lines here is just quickly change the styling because right now they might be a little bit hard to see. So I'm just go ahead and apply a different color to these break lines. I'm going to go into my vector options, line styles, I'm just going to change the color here to a yellow. So those are our extracted break lines that we are able to generate from our source, originally bathymetric LiDAR data that we created an elevation grid from. And if I switch our shader, we might be able to see a little bit better here. So here's our final output, our break lines, and they're overlaid on top of our generated bathymetric elevation grid.
All right, that was awesome. Thank you, Gus. So,
Absolutely.
thank you. So I'm going to introduce some of our other guests. So, fans of the podcast may remember our next guest, Tomer Ketter, a lead at Map the Gaps and the upcoming Ocean Floor Explore Conference. Hello, Tomer. How are you?
Hi, Meg. Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
It's great to see you. We always love talking to you about this stuff because you are definitely at the forefront of a lot of this. So it will be very exciting to get into that stuff today.
Yep.
Um, our other guests are Matt Nichols and Joe Regard. They'll be joining us back. So welcome. And then Gus is also going to be available to answer some questions and demo some answers in Global Mapper. So thank you to everybody for joining us on the panel. And yeah, let's get into it. So I'm going to start by posing a question for Tomer since he hasn't had the opportunity to speak yet. But Tomer, would you tell us a bit about you and your work and your experiences with Global Mapper?
Yes, absolutely. I'd love to. Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. It's a great honor to be part of this webinar. So my background is in hydrography and oceanography. I've spent the last 15 or so years mapping the ocean floor in different parts of the world. And I think the first version of Global Mapper that I used was 13 or maybe 12 even. And since then, it's been my Swiss Army knife, like Joe mentioned earlier. It's just the best and most useful and most straightforward tool for everything that's GIS, including bathymetry. And I've used it for many types of projects, anything from government-related research institutions to scientific ocean floor exploration and even private submersible expeditions.
Amazing. Thank you. Um, yeah, so I'm going to have Joe and Matt answer a few questions regarding their presentation, and then we'll hop back in and answer some more questions. So, first up, I have one that is asking what bin size they were using to process the data to.
We definitely had a spec on this one for how many points per meter they wanted, but I've left my sizing when I'm moving things in a global mapper, it is the automatic, just bringing things in. When it asks me to specify, it's 3 feet by 3 feet is what I was doing on this one.
Awesome. Thank you. And then we have another question. Sonar doesn't get right up to the shoreline in the extreme shallow areas. They're wondering, how do you define the exact lake boundary and how do you interpolate these shallow areas where LiDAR or sonar isn't available?
Um, I guess I'll jump on this one. So we flew, one of our partners on this project collected topo bathy LiDAR, which is green LiDAR in the areas along with an image and then traditional LiDAR data. And so from the shoreline down to about 12 feet was where our cutoff line was. We had topo bathy LiDAR. So remembering that green and red line, what we would do is the green line is where the boat was safe, and the red line is where we had to get sonar across from it. So if we have to do some sonar head tilting with the sonar head, we can tilt it 15 and 30 degrees and make sure we get overlap over that topo bathy LiDAR, and that gives us a check against the topo bathy LiDAR to the sonar data at all crossings. And then along with some quality control and quality assurance work that we do. So on that particular project, there was 3 different survey platforms running with 3 different sifters and 3 different INSs. So that just adds to the complication, but you got to manage that so that you make sure you get overlap over the topobathy LiDAR with the sonar, and then that checks it. But inherently, the sonar data is more accurate than topobathy LiDAR. So even though they say they're getting 30 feet of penetration, what foot of penetration is actually reliable is vetted with the sonar data.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, we have a few more questions for you guys. Specifically, a lot of people are curious what systems or hardware you guys were using.
So on the project you just saw, that's a Rezon C, so it's called Teledyne Rezon CBAT is the sonar. So that's a beamforming multi-beam sonar with 256, 512, or 1,024 beams of sonar. The INS system we're running is a Planix POS MV. That's the inertial motion unit, and then the GAN, I don't know if you're familiar with those systems, but we're running that. We were collecting the data inside of HiPAC, which is, depending on who you talk to, the industry standard. But HiPAC is like the original way to put yourself on a chart and a datum. So it's got more band-aids and they just been progressing as it goes through it. So it's called HiPAC Max with High Sweep is what we collect it with. There's a lot of data streaming inside of that boat when it's collecting. There's 3 networks running at gigabit all day long. I think the boat right now has 4 monitors running. So the data acquisition plus the real-time waterfall, and you really don't have time for anything else, and you get PTSD after a while trying to keep it all running. So
Yeah, I'm
Global
sure.
Mapper really helps us with that. So I don't have to worry about all of that while I'm trying to herd all those cats.
That's awesome. Thank you for answering that. So Tomer, I have a question for you, which is, in your opinion, what is the best feature or function in Global Mapper for users specializing in bathymetry or hydrography?
Okay, that's a really good question because I think that Global Mapper, when compared to all the popular GIS desktop programs out there, I think Global Mapper is really natively designed to handle the vertical domain and anything from DTMs and point clouds that are not so easily supported in other softwares. And that lets you, first of all, very quickly and very smoothly on the fly merge different data sets, convert them, reproject them, visualize them, basically in no time. Um, and very easy with the GUI. It's just completely straightforward. So that's one of the greatest features, I think, of Global Mapper. And of course, the stability of the software. It very, very rarely crashes or has any bugs from what my experience that, like I said, started from Global Mapper 12, I think.
Yeah, that's wild. Thank you. I'm gonna pitch another one to you, and then I'll hop back
Mhm.
over to the survey systems team and Gus. But would you share an experience that involves both bathymetry and GIS software and why they're so powerful together?
So, absolutely, yeah. Of course, a map, as we know it, is the first layer of information of any part of the planet. So when we attempt to understand or explore any kind of area on the seafloor, of course we need to bring it into software, visualize it, and that lets us create immediately a 3D or 4D um, scene that brings out all the detail from the seafloor. And for example, I'd like to mention one survey that I did back in Fiji and that we featured on that previous episode. I don't know if a lot of people heard it, but um, back then we helped a small tribe on an island, on a really remote island in Fiji, survey and visualize their ancestral waters for the first time. So basically, it was a lagoon and a reef that they've relied on for generations. And it immediately, when we brought it in, it immediately became instantaneously, the water is like, disappears. The water becomes transparent, and we can see the seafloor with all the little details, including deeper channels and pinnacles and any kind of rocky formations that have been for generation the areas that they were fishing and the areas that they relied on for their subsistence. Um, so that's been a very kind of powerful experience that brings the bathymetry to the surface, so to speak, using GIS software.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember Stefano Moon Katz, who joined us
Yep.
for that episode, mentioned how it was helpful to also understanding like the patterns of shark in the water and other stuff like that. So
Yep.
it's really interesting to see how those insights kind of come about when you have a map in front of you.
Yes.
So awesome. We actually have a question that someone has posed to the whole panel, so I'm going to ask that
Mhm.
now. And whoever wants to answer first is welcome to. But in addition to bathymetry data, do you also process backscatter data in Global Mapper? And what suggestions do you have for processing backscatter?
Um, yeah, I can jump on that one. So absolutely, we process backscatter, and that gives us. For those not familiar, backscatter is the intensity of the sound returning from the seafloor. So not just the time that it takes that gives us the depth, but the intensity tells us something qualitative about the type of the seafloor. So we can pretty much, from just taking a look at quickly processed backscatter, where are areas of mud or sand or rocks or coral. Um, so that's also very helpful, and it's processed in third-party programs. But when we have that final image, which can be, it's usually a grayscale image, I like to bring it into Global Mapper and drape it onto the bathymetry that's already there, and there's an option that you can use texture shading that insanely brings out the detail. It's just an incredible tool. My favorite of all the bathymetry programs out there. The rendering and the shading Global Mapper is the top. Is my favorite.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Yep.
I'd like to speak to the backscatter. Um, so on the data collection side, you first got to have a sonar that's capable of acquiring it. And then secondly, you need to make sure that you really have your power and your gain and your frequency set when you start. When you're collecting backscatter, you don't want to be in what Rezon calls tracker mode, where it's constantly changing the power and the gain and things like that. So if you're looking for the intensity return from the sonar coming back to the bottom, coming back at how bright it is, that's what I call brightness. Um, you need to be on one setting the entire time so that you can and it also needs to run in conjunction with a coring project so that you can start to classify what those bottoms are, either being grab samples or core samples, to compare that against it with those geophysics that you're collecting. And it is difficult to acquire because the settings on your sonar up in 10 feet of water versus 140 feet of water. So you got to pick the best of the two evils when you have your sonar set. But once you set it, you got to hold those settings if the client is requiring uh, backscatter or snippets. Snippets is looking at the water column, biologics usually.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Next, I think we have a question for Gus. Let me find that. What tools in Global Mapper would you recommend to analyze mobile sediment features if you have time-lapse data?
Interesting. Yeah, that's a great question. And this kind of speaks to something that we work with a lot of users on projects related to, which is kind of change detection. And there are a couple ways to go about it in Global Mapper, uh, but the most common and the first of which that I would typically recommend is, and let me just share my screen here quickly so we can give you a little visual context on what I'm talking about here. So within Global Mapper, I don't have multiple terrain layers currently loaded in this workspace, but if I did, I have the ability to go to our terrain analysis drop-down menu, and then I can choose this combine compare terrain layers. And I need to have 2 layers turned on just to access that dialog, just to show you here. And then we have a particular operation that we can utilize, which is the signed subtraction, or we could do unsigned. So that would be the absolute change between them. And basically we're subtracting one grid from the other. The output would be a difference grid representing the amount of kind of elevation change over that particular time series. So again, if we have a initial data collection and we have an elevation grid representing the sediment then, and then we have a second data collection and we have a second grid, we can subtract those, we can generate a raster surface representing the difference. And then the other thing we can do is calculate the actual amount of volume change between them. So we can choose this tool, measure volume between surfaces. So that's the other way that we can evaluate change between 2 data collections in terms of maybe some of that mobile sediment change over time, if I'm understanding the question correctly there.
Awesome, thank you. And before you leave Global Mapper, I do actually have another question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you export all of the cross profiles as CAD?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just quickly turn on those cross profiles again so we can take a look at the export options. And again, one thing I talked about is the ability to initiate the path profile view from an existing line feature. So we could just quickly draw a profile like this. Or we have the ability to select a feature, and then we have a lot more control over the specific place that we want to view the profile of, and we can right click, analysis measurement, path profile. Now we've opened up the path profile tool. First step would be to initiate the perpendicular profile views. And now from that file drop-down menu within the path profile dialog, we have the ability to export to a DXF. So long answer to a short question. The answer is yes. You can export those cross profiles directly to a CAD format.
Awesome, thank you, Gus. One other question for survey systems, but Gus, I don't know if you'd want to demo this one at all, so I'm going to pitch it now.
Sure.
We have someone who's new to bathymetry and has heard that the return data can be noisy. Did survey systems use Global Mapper for point classification?
No, I did not use Global Mapper for any classification. I was using it as a repository of all of our data and review of everything, and just the quick review and keeping track of what was cleaned. So I love the organization where I can have different folders and move things in and keeping track. Huge benefit for that. But I'd love to look into a classification.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
From what I understand, your use case is, the visual QC combining data, especially data that's referenced to different datums, for example,
Yep.
because the HiPACK system, everything has to be in one datum. So for your use case, that brings up something that I had mentioned briefly at the beginning of my demo, which is the ability to treat sonar data as if it's point cloud data. The thing to note about that is you need to remember that if you're treating it like point cloud data, you're not going to maintain those attributes. If you're using it explicitly to use the point cloud tools and to evaluate and analyze the elevation side of things, then it's a really valid workaround. Again, export to CSV, import the plain text file, treat it as a point cloud, and then you have access to all of our point cloud specific tools, which I talked to, but I didn't get into any detail about what that entailed. So this is a great question and a good opportunity to talk about that. So because we are treating that sonar survey as if it was LiDAR, then we have the ability, and let me just turn on that one particular layer here. So we have this sonar survey, we're loading it in, we're telling Global Mapper to treat it as if it was a point cloud. And now we have access to all the point cloud specific tools, one of which is our noise classification tool. And that is accessed from this classification drop-down menu. It's within what we call our automatic point cloud analysis dialog. And so we have multiple kind of noise classification methods that you can choose from, among other kind of built-in classification tools. So another kind of long answer to a short question. Yes, you can use, if you treat the sonar data as if it's point cloud data, then you can run a noise classification on it, and you can kind of clean up some of those, some of that noise that can occur there.
Awesome.
And from the data collection side, can that data be noisy? Absolutely. It depends on which sensor you're using. We have several different sensors here at Survey Systems that we use. Bottom tracking is important, but you can't bottom track if you're interested in snippets and you're, backscatter and snippets. But there's also a function inside of our data collection package, which is called bags. So that's where we do bathymetric grids, and then that's where we put information into it, metadata into it, which is like total propagated uncertainty, quality control, the sensor used, what the settings were on the sensor when it was collected, and then it creates what we call a bags. And then that bag can be visualized as well and incorporated inside a global mapper. So again, GIS, metadata, data about data. So you not only have your returns, but you can have bags, and then it depends on how complicated you want to get. You could have backscatter, you could have a snippets layer, you could have a backscatter layer, you could have your bags layer, which gives you it gives you an indication of how many returns were in the bags. And then NOAA likes using bags because then they know if you hit the spec or you did not. So each grid will have what its accuracy is, how many returns you had in it, what sensors were used, what the settings were on the sensors, and then, so it just starts layering up. It depends on the client and then how you collect that. But when you first start collecting, like when you're getting started, it's really noisy because you're not real familiar on how to set your power and your gain settings and get the sonar tuned in, or what frequency. That is even more importantly. So if you're going to be in 140 feet of depth, you don't want to get the highest frequency. You want to find something in the middle to make sure you're collecting quality data, because the collection is so important to the workflow at the office, right? So you can collect noisy data and they can spend 3.5, 4 hours cleaning the data, or you can collect good, clean data, and then you can lower that processing down to about 2 hours for every hour collected.
Thank you for those insights, Matt. I'm going to pose one more question to Tomer this time. Tomer, I know that you have worked on the project Seabed 2030, and I just wanted some insights about what that project is and what you're aiming to do there.
Okay. Seabed 2030. First of all, I'm not affiliated directly with Seabed 2030 anymore. I have worked for them in the past, and it's an initiative that basically tries to bring together all the available bathymetry data of the world oceans and compile one bathymetry product that is available to all. So basically, many governments and corporations and the navies are holding a lot of bathymetric data and are generating more every year. And there's a big effort into trying to get them to share that as much as they can. And many countries and many large geophysical and survey companies are participating and are contributing. And of course, there's parallel to that, there's the more publicly accessible scientific data and things that are traditionally more shared. So I think the latest statistics show something like 28% coverage, which is growing pretty impressively. When I started, it was about 5% or
That's
10%.
wild.
Yeah, it was. I think it was around 10% when I joined. Um, and so yeah, I think that effort is really showing nice, impressive results. To really achieve that goal by 2030, which is only 5 years from now, or even less, I think there's going to need to be a big leap in technology and collaboration. But as it is, it's still a very impressive achievement.
Absolutely, thank you. And I do have a related question for either Tomer or anybody else who wants to respond to it, just to kind of wrap up our event today. And that is, why is mapping surfaces underwater so important?
Wow. To reach back to the previous question, which was mapping sediment transportation, which is hugely important on the interior of the United States to manage its water. We were just on the lower Colorado, and there is an enormous amount of sedimentation that is happening on the lower Colorado. So we've worked and been in conjunction with some processes for trying to manage that water. It's become, I don't know if everybody's familiar with how uh, confrontational water rights are on the lower Colorado. Um, I think Mark Twain said it. Said whiskey's for drinking, right, and then water's for fighting, right. So the amount of water that we have is overallocated, and the sedimentation is reducing the amount of water that's there. So trying to realize how much water you have that's allocated compared to how much storage you have is incredibly important. And being able to map that sand wave as it's being transported down the river. So if you run a survey line up the river and then you come back the next day and you run that same survey line up the river, you can gauge peak to peak and find out how fast that sediment is transporting. And that will also help whomever, usually it's a federal entity, on their dredging operations. So they know how much water, they know how much sand is headed towards their dam. So they're going to have to get that dredged out, and therefore they know how much water is going to be displaced by that sediment. That, along with, I think Tomer, you would be, for the offshore work, for the seabed work, is like, I think the United States has more ground beneath the water than they own above the water. Is one instance that I'll talk about. So, and not by a little, by a lot. And so we
Yeah,
kind of need to know what's down there
yeah, I think
to
you're probably
manage
right.
that resource.
I'm not sure of the exact proportions there, but there's probably more territory underwater than above water. And yeah, I mean anything. Just think about fiber optics and communications. Like 99% of the internet goes underwater, and you can't lay a fiber optic that costs I don't know how many billions of dollars without making a map first. Wind farms, tsunami models, everything.
Yeah, those are some big things. So
Yeah.
definitely very important. Well, thank you everyone for joining the panel today. I'm going to wrap up the presentation, but I do want to say if your question did not get answered, we will be following up with you after the fact. So don't fret, we will contact you. Thank you so much for attending. We've got some resources in the materials tab. So there's a little paperclip symbol up in the menu. If you click that, you can download a bunch of our resources, including upcoming events, training, as well as our video collection, which has a range of tutorials, our podcast, where you can check out Tomer's episode, And yeah, that's that. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.